Hey everyone, this is Belinda Carr. Welcome back to the Boost AC podcast, where we dive into the world of construction and explore the stories of people and companies who are shaping the future of our industry. We've got yet another exciting podcast for you today. I'm speaking with Meredith Moore, founder and CEO of Ouroboros Deconstruction. Thanks for joining us, Meredith.
Yeah, so happy I could be here today and chat with you.
So I came across your company through LinkedIn because I had Eric Law who is based out in California. I think he's in a similar area to you. He's in the deconstruction business too. So through him, I came across.
Yeah, he has Urban Machine, which
That's right.
basically it's a AI robotic processing for lumber. So it
That's
helps
right.
deboil lumber that comes out of deconstruction projects.
Exactly, yeah, and we had him on the podcast, and he talked us through his production line and how he's made his business pretty sustainable. So I would love to dive into your company too. But before we do that, let's talk about you. Just a brief overview of Ouroboros. Your company is based in Toronto, and as the name suggests, y'all take apart homes and salvage building materials like lumber, architectural finishes, and fixtures. Is that pretty nice? When did you start this company?
So the company really started in 2022 is when we incorporated. This was an idea that had been forming for quite a while. My background is in interior design. I went to Parsons and got my master's in interior design. And prior to that, I studied history of art and architecture at Brown University. And I think for me, I'd always had this interest in how design could solve problems. And I worked as an interior designer for about 15 years in various kind of parts of the field. I worked in residential design. I worked as a consultant for real estate developers. And when my family moved to Toronto in 2019, I saw the amount of renovation that was going on in this city. And because Toronto has homes built within more of the urban fabric than you see generally in New York, I kept seeing more and more renovations that were just out front. In New York, it's happening, but it's happening, within the buildings, and you're not seeing the amount of waste that's coming out of these renovations. As a designer, I was always very, I could, um, I started
Cognizant.
noticing the amount of waste that were coming from small design choices we would make. You would decide that no longer was that flooring going to match with the new design, so it would be taken out, and suddenly you would have, 2,000 square feet of flooring that, while it no longer worked for the new design, was still completely viable. And for the most part, that wasn't being recycled, it was ending up in the landfill. And so when my family moved to Toronto and I was confronted with just the number of dumpsters or waste bins out front in front of everyone's yard, uh, it just really got me thinking that there has to be a better
Better way.
way to do this. And I was familiar with deconstruction. I knew that this was happening in a handful of cities in the States. I knew that they had started to enact bylaws and mandates in British Columbia for deconstruction. And so when my family bought a house in 2021, I met with quite a few different contractors and demolition companies and explained that we were going to be doing an interior renovation and I was looking to deconstruct. I wanted to basically salvage as much of the material coming out as possible. What we weren't salvaging, I wanted to recycle. And pretty much everyone just told me no. That
Yeah.
wasn't the way things were done here. None of that would be reusable. It was a waste of time. It was a waste of money. And so knowing that this was possible and it was happening in other places, I basically put together my own small deconstruction crew. And we just used this as kind of the case study, the
Case
first
study.
project here. And then from there, it was a bit of a slow build of figuring out how to get more projects doing interior deconstructions. And then we did our first full structural decon in 2023.
Wow. So in that first project that you tackled, you believe you said it was your family home. What sort of elements were you able to salvage?
Right. So in our home, we salvaged all of the original flooring. Once again, I met with quite a few different flooring contractors and asked them to sand it down. And all of them said it's just not possible. In Toronto, as in I think some places in New York, kind of turn of the century homes all have this very thin quarter sawn white oak flooring, and some of it in our house had water damage, and they said you're just never going to be very happy with the way it looks. So we removed it. That was one of the big things that we salvaged. That's now become paneling throughout our house. It's wall paneling and looks beautiful. And because of its relatively thin nature, when it's applied to the wall, it's adding pretty much no depth, which is great. We salvaged quite a bit of the old growth lumber that we were taking out for reframing, various finishes, fixtures, a lot of lighting fixtures that we repurposed throughout.
And so it sounds like when you repurposed it, you still removed it from one area of your home and then put it in another. But when you started growing your business, you had to think of ways to store all the stuff that you were salvaging. Was that one
Absolutely.
of the, I mean, the hurdle of just help getting people to change their mindset of deconstruction? That was one thing that you had to tackle, but the other is probably the storage aspect. Like, where do you use it? Have it on hand when another person contacts you, so you have this like inventory that you can offer them. Where
Absolutely.
do you store all that stuff?
Anyone who operates a deconstruction company actually it's a two-pronged company. You have your deconstruction side, and then you have your material salvage side. Because as you deconstruct a home or any type of structure, you're left with all this material at the end. And so storage is one of the biggest problems most deconstruction companies face, especially those of us operating in urban centers such as Toronto. So we have been lucky that we started out with basically a barn space about an hour outside of Toronto. And we've recently moved into an existing building that's slated for demolition within the next 1 to 2 years. And we're using that space at a subsidized rent by the developer who will be taking it down. So we've been very lucky, but it's a big problem because you can imagine the scale of the material that we're dealing with is quite large.
Absolutely, and I know real estate in Toronto is no joke. And it's
Uh,
it's
like
an
most
ex
places,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very expensive out here.
So, how many projects have you completed so far? You said you started the company in 2022. So, you're relatively young and you have a lot of room for growth. But how many projects have you tackled so far?
I think we've done about 22 projects.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've done
Deconstruction or installation or both?
22 deconstruction projects. We have, I would say, I think 5 of those are full structural decons. So we're actually taking the home all the way down to the foundation. And the others were interior deconstructions of both residential and commercial properties.
Wow. And then what about all the items that you all have salvaged? Have you all been able to use it so far? Have you set up another arm of your business where you're selling all this stuff to homeowners?
Yes, we have within Ouroboros Deconstruction, we have our material salvage side. And so that is the other arm of our business where we're selling the lumber and the finishes and the fixtures to homeowners, to builders, to artists, designers, product manufacturers, anyone who's interested in reusing salvage material.
How do they find out about you? And like what percentage of material that you've salvaged have you already sold?
We are a young company. We're a small company. We haven't done a ton of marketing outreach, but we've been very lucky that through close networks of architects and designers and homeowners in the area, we've grown a pretty good following. So it's all pretty much been word of mouth so far. And I think we've probably sold, I mean, it's difficult. Of all the material we salvage, what have we sold? Probably 70% of it.
Wow, that's amazing. That's
Yes, it is. But you also have to consider that you can't, I mean, for us, we can't let material really build up because every time we get a new project, we have a lumber package worth, a full house worth of lumber. So it's in our best interest to make sure that we're selling materials so that we can make space for new projects.
Okay, so how is your business financially sustainable? Because like when I talked to Eric Law, I was asking him the same questions. But deconstruction is a labor intensive and can be time consuming process, and people aren't they don't really embrace the idea, and laws and are not set up to make it financially to have many financial incentives in that area. So how are you able to create a sustainable business, sustainable in the financial sense, obviously, not in the other sense?
So in the Toronto market, we have no bylaws or mandates or generally any incentives saying that someone has to deconstruct. So we're a selective service at the moment. Um, our company was profitable last year, which is wonderful, but that is out of like just incredible hard work on everyone's part. It is not an easy industry to be in right now, and that's across the board. And I think that's even where there are bylaws and mandates saying that you have to deconstruct. It's more expensive, it takes longer, and we have, if a demolition requires 1 to 2 people on site to demolish a house, we'll have 6 to 8 people there. And if they can do it in 2 days, we'll be there for 2 weeks, sometimes faster. But so it is a more costly process. And so when we have to compete against demolition companies, it can be challenging.
So who bears the extra cost of that demo? Because it sounds like it's about 3 times the amount of time, 3 times the amount of labor. Is
It's
it the
not
homeowner?
not always,
Not always.
not always, but it can be. Um, it's, we've gotten lucky on projects where it's just worked out, where maybe it was kind of a difficult project to get an excavator into, or we've been able to be very efficient with our time and the amount of people we have on site so that we can work quickly and efficiently to get the structure down. Um, and a lot of times it's a service that people decide that they're going to pay a little extra for because they feel it's really important. They understand that they're investing in the operational carbon of their home. And so they need to think about if they're going to be rebuilding a house so that they know that it's energy efficient, they're also thinking about the embodied carbon that they're producing when they demolish a home. And so on some projects, there is a little bit of they're paying more for our services. Not on all of them. Some of them were very competitive, but on some of them, we do cost more.
I was looking through your website, and I saw the statement that really piqued my interest. It said, through partnerships with local charities, y'all are able to offer tax credits to homeowners, which can reduce the overall cost. What sort of tax credits are available in Toronto? Um,
So we work with Habitat for Humanity, and there are a few other charities here where we're able to donate materials, kitchens, millwork, um, other fixtures from the home, and then we basically act as an intermediary. We're taking the materials out, and then we help kind of get them to Habitat or whatever other charity we're working with, and we pass along the tax credits to the
to the
homeowner.
homeowner. That's very cool. So where do you see your company heading in the next 3 to 5 years? It looks like you're in the beginning stages of the
Yep.
business, trying to figure out how to scale up. But how do you see Ouroboros Deconstruction growing?
So right now we're primarily focused on residential structures, which has been wonderful, and we've been operating on buildings that are really at a scale that we feel comfortable with. I see within the next 3 to 5 years that we're expanding into larger scale structures, more commercial projects. And then I think for us, a big focus has and always will be on the material side. We're really interested in finding wonderful ways to reuse these beautiful materials that we're harvesting out of our projects. And I'm a firm believer that deconstruction will not take off until we figure out a way to use these salvaged materials. Once these materials that we're taking out are viewed as a resource and as something with value, then deconstruction will be a way to kind of harvest or mine these materials in the same way that, you know, people will take the time to pull out all the metal from a project. if we can start giving value to the lumber in these homes or structures, then the time will be taken to take it all apart carefully.
That's fascinating. So you're talking about adding a different arm to your company now: the deconstruction arm, the storage and supplier arm, but then you're also talking about upcycling all these materials that you have salvaged, either
We do a little bit of
turning them into new kitchen cabinets, or like laminated lumber for like LVLs or something. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and we're already doing a little bit of this already. We've started regrading lumber so that it can be reused as structural lumber, which is wonderful because there are a few places in the States that allow that, but in Ontario currently, it all has to be regraded to be reused. So we are doing that, and we have a few items kind of within our company that we're showing how they can be upcycled. And then we partner with quite a few different artists and designers and furniture makers in Toronto that are really showing the beauty of these materials so that people can see the possibility.
Do you think that, I mean, old growth lumber used for furniture, I'm not trying to say that it's devaluing the lumber itself, but would you prefer to see it being used in new construction rather than for furniture or guitars cases? I've seen some people build that too out of.
I think if we're looking at the highest and best use, the easiest thing to do is to process the lumber and have it regraded and reused as structural lumber. There are only so many tables that can be built from old growth lumber, and we have so much lumber coming out of these projects. So while I think absolutely it's beautiful and it's wonderful to show the quality and the inherent characteristics of these through furniture or products, to be able to just build with it because it is the straightest, strongest lumber you can get. Yeah, it's hard to say that there's a better use for it than that.
Have you started working on a software arm to your company where you maybe on your website you have like an inventory list showing all the different types of lumber available, the quantity of all that available, or just some sort of way of categorizing all these different pieces you've salvaged?
Yeah, so we have a store, we have a shop on our website. But yes, we have been building out our inventory for our lumber over the past 2 months, and that's something that's going to be added in the next few weeks. So we're very excited about that. When we moved into our new warehouse, we've really made the effort to really work to catalog everything so that it's accessible online for people.
So over the last 2 years that you've been working on all these 22 projects, I believe you said, is there one that has stood out over the others? There was, I don't know, materials that maybe it was the first home that you worked on with your family, just something that's really close to your heart that took you down this amazing journey. I'm sure it hasn't been easy at all. You've had to change a lot of people's minds, and you're basically changing the way our industry thinks about used building materials. But is there one particular project that you hold really close to your heart?
Yeah, our first full structural deconstruction was a project about an hour outside of Toronto. The home itself was about 10,000 square feet and had been sitting vacant for over 7 years. And the homeowner had met with various engineers and architects and contractors, and everyone basically just said that it's going to cost more and never be as efficient if you try to retrofit this structure than if you just start new. They also had no intention of keeping 10,000 square feet, so they were shrinking the property envelope down, I think, to about 2,000 to 3,000. And so the decision was made that it needed to come down, and they met with us, and we spoke about the possibilities of deconstruction. And through that, we determined that we could keep the existing foundation. And that was going to be not only a huge cost savings, but also just a huge offset to the carbon they were producing through their project. So That project was our first full structural decon, by far the largest residential project that we've undertaken. And it just had some of the most beautiful materials within the house. Almost the entire home was constructed out of Douglas fir. So all of the joists, lots of large scale Douglas fir beams throughout. And one of the highlights on that project was there was a massive beehive that was behind one of the walls. And so we brought in an apiarist to come collect the bees, rehome them, and then we harvested all the honey. And we had about, I don't know, 11 mason jars of honey from that project, which was really wonderful, you know, and it's just such a, I'll always think back on that project, one with just the scale of it, but also just so many wonderful things we uncovered.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What a beautiful story. And so, other than the craft workers that are on your team that work on deconstructing these projects, what other teammates do you have? Do you have structural engineers and other interior designers on your team?
So we have a deconstruction crew that our base is about 4 people. The gentleman who leads the deconstruction crew has been doing hand demolition for over 40 years, and he's really the heart and soul of the crew. He leads all of the projects, and without his incredible depth of knowledge on all of this, we would not be where we are today. So I always have to thank Fernando. And then within our materials salvage side, it's myself, and I'm still pretty much leading the charge on the materials. And then I have 2 people, Manon, who is actually originally from Paris, and she worked extensively in the circular economy there, doing life cycle analysis and deconstruction projects for the city. And then Alexandra Moss, who is a heritage trade professional. And so she's been wonderful at helping us kind of figure out how we will restore and work through materials that we have on hand.
So, in addition to running this business, do you still have an interior design business on the side?
I have slowly been transitioning away from interior design, but I feel like they go hand in
They
hand.
do, yeah.
And I am so appreciative of my background in interior design, because I think it's given me this ability to see all the incredible possibilities of these materials. And so some people see a big chunk of wood and I think, well, that could be so many different things. So,
I mean, not to add
take
more,
on
I know your plate is
you know,
completely full, but if you were an interior designer, I mean, you could, when working as a consultant, you could say, oh, there's this beautiful wood feature that would look perfect in this space. And you could be using all that salvage wood from Ouroboros in that client's
yeah.
project. You just need to
What
duplicate
we
yourself.
Yeah, what we try to do on all of our projects is work with the client to figure out creative ways that we can reincorporate materials that we're removing from the deconstruction. So, and that way I'm still getting to really flex my design skills while not trying to have a
And
fourth
a
company.
second full-time job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for explaining your company. It's really exciting and challenging too. There are a lot of hurdles in this space, and I think on the client side, people have noble intentions and understand the need to reduce our carbon footprint, but it's the financial aspect of it. I wish we could have more tax credits, and
Yes.
the code officials were more supportive to companies like yours, because that obviously everyone, it comes down to whether this is financially sustainable for the homeowner, right? Like, we can have the best intentions, but if it's just too expensive, then what are we going to do about it? Like, my husband and I, we have flipped about 2 houses so far, and we do our best to not just follow the trends blindly, because as you know, you're in this space now. Every 2 years it's, oh, change your
Yeah.
countertops. It doesn't matter if you've got beautiful granite countertops, that's not trendy anymore. Throw those out and get quartz, or get the
Yeah.
next thing. Or tile is no longer trendy, get cheap plastic flooring. And we're just living such a wasteful cycle of existence, and it's not slowing down.
No.
So companies like yours are raising awareness about let's just buck the trend and let's think about what we already have. And if it's completely usable, if it has an extra 10 years of a lifespan left, why throw it out? Just because it doesn't, Pinterest told us that it's not pretty, who cares? So,
yeah, I think it's a few things. One, it's seeing these materials having beauty for different reasons. Then obviously they're not trendy, but they are significant and they're singular as opposed to being the same as everything else. And, you know, I think in previous generations, we've really been tied to these trends and to newness and to wanting to constantly be updating. But I'm really encouraged by younger generations and this return to thrifting when we look at clothing. And so I just think that hopefully, generally, interior design follows fashion. And so I hope that we start to see more of this of we don't need new. We're going to find ways to reuse the existing, and we're going to find the beauty in what is already here.
that's beautiful. I mean, I know you mentioned Restore Habitat for Humanity earlier in the podcast, and we used to have one right next to our house. That was our favorite place to go to. Just because you get secondhand, third-hand furniture from there.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful crafted stuff made of real metal, not hollow metal. There is so much we can just keep repurposing, just like our parents' generation or grandparents' generation used to. So I'm on board with what you're doing, and anything we can do to promote your business, please let us know. But before before we end the podcast, I do have to ask you, and I try to ask all my podcast guests this: what advice would you have for a young professional who's just coming into the construction industry, who is frustrated with this wastefulness that they observe and wants to carve an alternative path in sustainable construction the way you have?
I think it's really important to understand why things are done the way they are right now so that you can change them. And so if that means that you have to work within the current confines for a year or two to understand what the limitations are, that's really important. Finding a mentor, someone that has been doing this for a long time and can teach you the basics, I think is also a really wonderful way to understand the industry. And I always say this to everyone, but just start. Even if it's just standing up in a room full of people where maybe your opinion won't be appreciated, still just making the point of, well, maybe we don't need to throw that out. Maybe it can be reincorporated, or have we considered source separating on site, making recommendations that maybe, people just haven't thought of.
Well, that's really good advice. Thank you so much, Meredith, once again for explaining your company, your thought process, and future plans. Really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing Ouroboros Deconstruction continue to grow.
Thank you so much, Belinda.
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed speaking with you today.